Welcome back to Fanfics in a Nutshell. Today we're exploring a version of Naruto's story that feels both familiar and completely different, because in this timeline one small detail changes everything. Naruto Uzumaki is not born with bright blonde hair like the fourth Hokage. Instead, he is born with crimson red hair, the unmistakable mark of the Uzumaki clan. And that one difference quietly alters how the world sees him. But the real question is this: if Naruto grows up even more isolated, even more determined, and forced to rely entirely on himself, what kind of shinobi does he become? Let's begin where every legend begins, with a child and a village that does not want him. By the time Naruto turned 5 years old, he had already learned something that most children never have to understand. Most people in the village hated him. It was not something he realized all at once. At first, Naruto simply noticed small differences. Other children played together in the dusty playgrounds of Konoha. They chased each other, they laughed, they shouted. But whenever Naruto walked closer, the gang stopped. Parents called their children away, doors closed, eyes narrowed. At first, Naruto believed he had simply done something wrong. Maybe he had broken a rule he didn't know. Maybe he had said something strange. But over time, a pattern emerged. It did not matter what he did. The result was always the same: whispers, glares, silence, sometimes worse. One day, Naruto walked into a small shop hoping to buy food. The shopkeeper stared at him, then spat on the floor. "Get out." The door slammed in his face before he even understood what had happened. Naruto walked home slowly that day. He climbed into a small bed and stared into the darkness, trying to understand why the world seemed to hate him. Naruto was not stupid. Even as a child, his mind was unusually sharp. He began examining himself carefully. Maybe the problem was his appearance. His hair was bright red. Unusual, yes, but he had seen other strange hair colors in the village. That could not be the reason. His eyes were blue. Normal. He had 10 fingers, 10 toes, 2 arms, 2 legs, just like everyone else, except for the whisker-like marks on his cheeks. Sometimes he wondered if they were some kind of clan symbol. Maybe somewhere in the world there were other people with red hair and whisker marks. Maybe there was a place where he belonged. But when Naruto asked about his parents, he received only cold answers. They were dead, killed the day he was born, and that was the end of the conversation. So every night, Naruto lay awake in the dark, thinking, analyzing, trying to solve the mystery of his own life. Eventually, he reached a simple conclusion. If he could not control how others treated him, then he would control what he became. Everything changed on Naruto's 6th birthday. That morning, something strange happened. His caretaker never arrived. Instead, a masked shinobi appeared at his window. Before Naruto could react, he was lifted into the air and carried across the rooftops of Konoha. Moments later, he was dropped into the office of the Hokage. The third Hokage looked down at him with tired but thoughtful eyes. That day, Naruto learned several important things. First, the Hokage had been secretly paying for his living expenses. Second, now that he was 6, he would begin receiving a stipend and living independently. And third, he would begin attending the ninja academy immediately. For the first time in his life, Naruto felt something unfamiliar: hope. The academy was the dream of every child in Konoha. It was where shinobi were born, where heroes were made. Maybe, just maybe, if he became a ninja, the village would stop hating him. But that night, as the sun set beyond the rooftops of Konoha, doubt crept into his thoughts. Would anything really change? Would the other students treat him differently? Or would the academy simply become another place where he did not belong? Naruto stared out the window as the last light of the day faded. Then he clenched his fists. No, none of that mattered. If the village hated him, then he would become someone they could not ignore. He would become so strong, so respected, so undeniable that even the people who despised him would be forced to acknowledge him. Naruto Uzumaki would become the greatest shinobi Konoha had ever seen. He would become Hokage, and even if he could never control their minds, he would one day claim their hearts. But Naruto did not yet understand something important. The path he was about to walk would not be the same one we know. Because unlike the Naruto of the original story, this version of Naruto would grow up almost entirely alone. No mentors, no friendships, no shortcuts. Just a library, a mystery seal, and a boy determined to master the entire shinobi world through sheer will. And that journey begins in the most unexpected place: the Konoha Archive Library. The first weeks at the academy quickly revealed something Naruto had already begun to suspect. The world of shinobi was far larger than he had imagined, and he was already behind. Many of the other students came from shinobi clans. They had grown up surrounded by training. Some already knew how to throw kunai, others practiced taijutsu with their parents. A few even understood the basics of chakra control. Naruto had none of that. He had entered the academy with nothing but determination, and determination alone did not help when facing children who had trained since childhood. During the first taijutsu evaluations, the difference was painfully obvious. Naruto lasted only seconds against some opponents. He was thrown to the ground again and again. The laughter of the other students followed him like a shadow. 10 seconds today, one boy mocked after a match. Maybe next time you'll last 12. Naruto said nothing. But every humiliation added another quiet weight to the promise he had made. He would not fail. The true problem, however, was not physical. It was knowledge. One afternoon during class, Iruka began explaining chakra theory. The other students nodded along. Naruto understood almost none of it. 361 chakra points, energy flowing through the body, techniques fueled by spiritual and physical power, hand seals that shape that power into jutsu. To Naruto, it sounded almost like magic. After the lesson, Naruto approached Iruka quietly. "Iruka-sensei, what exactly is chakra?" Iruka seemed surprised, but he answered patiently. "Chakra is the energy within every living being," he explained. "Shinobi learned to mold that energy into techniques." Then Iruka demonstrated a sequence of hand seals, a burst of smoke. Suddenly, Iruka had transformed into Naruto himself. Naruto stared in awe. For the first time, the world of shinobi felt real. Not just stories from old books, not just heroes and legends, but something he could learn, something he could become. That night, Naruto lay awake thinking. If chakra could allow someone to walk on water, breathe fire, create illusions, then the academy lessons were only the beginning. There had to be more knowledge somewhere, more techniques, more secrets. And if Naruto wanted to catch up to the others, he would need to find them. The answer arrived by accident, or perhaps not by accident at all. One afternoon, while practicing alone in the forest outside the academy, Naruto overheard two Chunin talking nearby. They spoke casually about the Konoha Archive Library, about how academy students were allowed access to the basic sections, about how it contained scrolls on taijutsu, ninjutsu, and chakra theory. Naruto froze. A library filled with shinobi knowledge. For a moment, he wondered if he had misunderstood, but the idea refused to leave his mind. That evening, Naruto ran through the streets of Konoha, toward the massive building carved beneath the Hokage monument, the Archive Library. The doors were enormous, heavy, official. Naruto hesitated before entering. Places like this did not usually welcome him. But he pushed the doors open anyway. Inside, he found a world he had never imagined. Endless shelves, thousands of scrolls, knowledge stacked from floor to ceiling. For a moment, Naruto simply stood there in stunned silence. Then the guard at the desk glanced up. "Pass?" Naruto froze again. He expected to be thrown out. Instead, the guard scribbled something on a slip of paper. "Academy student pass." Naruto stared at it, then slowly took it. Just like that, the doors to the shinobi world had opened. Naruto's life changed from that day forward. Every afternoon after academy classes, he returned to the archives. He began with the most basic scrolls: taijutsu fundamentals, body conditioning, balance training, chakra flow theory. At first, the information was overwhelming, but Naruto approached it the same way he approached everything else. Slowly, carefully, relentlessly. He studied every illustration, every diagram, every explanation. If something didn't make sense, he reread it. If it still didn't make sense, he practiced until it did. The scrolls became his teachers. The quiet library became his classroom. And for the first time in his life, Naruto felt like he belonged somewhere. Months passed, then a year. Naruto began noticing something unusual. Two different currents of chakra flowed through his body. The first was calm, warm, stable. He thought of it as yellow chakra. The second was different, wild, violent, almost alive. He called it red chakra. Whenever he tried to mold the red chakra, it resisted him. Sometimes it even disrupted his techniques. So Naruto made a decision. He would ignore it. Instead, he focused entirely on mastering the calmer yellow chakra. And the results were extraordinary. His chakra control improved rapidly. His physical conditioning surpassed most of his classmates. Even his taijutsu began improving. But the red chakra did not disappear. It simply waited. One day, while experimenting with chakra flow during meditation, Naruto noticed something even stranger. A seal appeared on his stomach, a black symbol with lines spreading outward like rays of the sun. Naruto stared at it in shock. A seal, on his body. Someone had placed it there. But who, and why, was it connected to the red chakra? The archives contained many scrolls on jutsu, but almost nothing about advanced sealing techniques. Naruto searched for weeks, found nothing. Eventually, he stopped looking. Some instinct deep within him seemed to whisper the same message. Leave it alone, for now. 3 years passed like this. Study, training, study again. Naruto pushed himself harder than anyone else in the academy. Morning workouts, afternoon classes, evenings in the archives, nighttime meditation. While other students relied on their clans, Naruto built himself from knowledge, piece by piece, technique by technique. He even discovered something remarkable, a forbidden jutsu hidden among higher-level scrolls, the shadow clone technique. Unlike normal clones, shadow clones were real. They could fight, think, train, and when they disappeared, their experience returned to the original. But the technique required enormous chakra. Most shinobi could barely create one. Naruto created several, and suddenly, his training multiplied. By the time Naruto reached 10 years old, he was no longer the weak boy who had entered the academy. His taijutsu had sharpened, his chakra control had matured, his mind had grown disciplined. And the boy once mocked as Tomato Head now stood at the very top of his class. When graduation day arrived, Naruto Uzumaki finished first, and the village began whispering. But Naruto did not celebrate, because graduation meant something new, something more dangerous, something that would finally test whether all those years of isolation had been worth it. He would become a genin, and he would join a team, under the command of one of Konoha's most famous shinobi, Hatake Kakashi, and Kakashi was about to discover something very interesting. The lonely red-haired boy the village despised was already thinking like a shinobi far beyond his years. Graduation day arrived quietly. For most students at the academy, it was a celebration. Families gathered outside the building. Parents spoke proudly about their children becoming shinobi. Some even cried. Naruto noticed all of it. But he stood apart from the crowd, watching silently. No one had come for him. No one ever did. Still, the absence no longer hurt the way it once had. Years of solitude had hardened Naruto's emotions into something controlled and disciplined. Instead of seeking comfort from others, he had found purpose, and that purpose had carried him further than anyone expected. When Iruka read the final rankings, the classroom fell silent. First place, Uzumaki Naruto. For a moment, the room didn't react, then whispers began. Surprise, confusion, even disbelief. The same boy they had mocked years earlier had somehow surpassed every other student in the academy. Naruto didn't smile. He simply accepted his headband. The metal plate gleamed in the sunlight as he tied it across his forehead. For Naruto, this was not the end of the journey. It was only the beginning. Team assignments followed soon after. Naruto listened without much interest until his own name was called. Team 7. His teammates were two students he barely knew, Mayu Kamizuki and Rai Hagane. Neither seemed particularly pleased about the arrangement. Mayu stood nervously behind Rai, avoiding Naruto's gaze entirely. Rai looked openly annoyed. Naruto had seen that expression before. He ignored it. Their Jonin instructor arrived moments later, a tall shinobi with silver hair, his forehead protector tilted to cover one eye, his face hidden behind a mask. Hatake Kakashi, one of the most famous shinobi in Konoha, the copy ninja. Kakashi observed the three new genin quietly. Even without speaking, their body language told him everything he needed to know. Mayu Kamizuki, nervous, intelligent, a talent for genjutsu, but lacking confidence. Rai Hagane, aggressive, stubborn, strong with weapons, but clearly prone to acting before thinking. And then there was the third, Uzumaki Naruto. He sat slightly apart from the others, watching, studying, his expression calm, but his eyes carried a quiet determination Kakashi had seen only once before, long ago, in another student. Minato Namikaze, Naruto's father. Kakashi hid a small smile behind his mask. The resemblance was undeniable, not physically. Naruto had inherited Kushina's bright red hair, but the way he watched people, the way he analyzed situations before acting, that was pure Minato. And Kakashi knew something else as well. Naruto had grown up alone, without mentors, without guidance, without the love his parents had wanted for him. The third Hokage had insisted that the hardship would make him stronger, but Kakashi sometimes wondered if Minato would have agreed. Now, he was about to find out what kind of shinobi that loneliness had created. Let's introduce ourselves, Kakashi said casually. Name, likes, dislikes, dreams. Rai spoke first. The name's Hagane Rai. I like weapons. My goal is to become the best weapons specialist in Konoha. His voice carried confidence, and a little arrogance. Mayu followed quietly. My name is Mayu. I like birds. My dream is to help children who grow up alone. Her voice faltered slightly, but the sincerity in it was clear. Then Naruto spoke, without hesitation. I'm Uzumaki Naruto. He paused briefly. I will become the next Hokage. The rooftop fell silent. There was no laughter, no mockery. Naruto's tone carried none of the childish boasting Kakashi expected, only quiet certainty. Kakashi's visible eye narrowed slightly. Interesting. Very interesting. The following morning, the new team gathered at the training field. They'd been told to arrive early, but Kakashi was nowhere to be seen. An hour passed. Then too, Rai began complaining about hunger. Mayu sat quietly beside him. Naruto said nothing. Instead, he watched the environment carefully and thought, why had Kakashi told them to arrive early? Why instruct them to skip breakfast? Why leave them waiting alone? Naruto closed his eyes and focused on the flow of chakra in his body, thinking, analyzing. Then suddenly, he understood. Naruto opened his eyes. We need a plan. Rai frowned. What? Kakashi-sensei is testing how we work together. Naruto gestured around the empty training ground. He's probably watching us right now. Rai looked around suspiciously. I don't see him. He's a Jonin, Naruto replied calmly. That means he doesn't want us to see him. Mayu watched the conversation carefully, curiosity slowly replacing her fear. Naruto continued. We each have different strengths. He looked at Rai. You're strongest with projectile weapons. Then Mayu, you specialize in genjutsu. Finally, himself. I'm strongest in close combat. Rai crossed his arms. So what's your point? Naruto's answer was simple. If we combine our abilities, we can force Kakashi-sensei into a disadvantage. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Rai shrugged. Fine. If nothing else, he seemed curious to see what Naruto had planned. Mayu nodded quietly. For the first time, Team 7 began working together. When Kakashi finally appeared, the real test began. 2 small bells hung from his belt. Your objective, Kakashi explained lazily, is to take these bells from me before noon. Rai frowned. That's it? Kakashi smiled behind his mask. Whoever fails to get a bell, he pointed to a wooden post nearby, will be tied up and forced to watch the others eat lunch. Naruto's mind immediately recognized the trap. 2 bells, 3 students. At least one person had to fail. The test was designed to force them to compete against each other. Kakashi wanted them to betray one another. Rai and Mayu realized it too. Naruto could see the hesitation in their expressions, but they had already made a plan. Naruto gave a subtle signal. Plan B. After a brief moment of uncertainty, his teammates nodded and vanished into the forest. Naruto leapt into the trees, watching, waiting. Kakashi remained standing in the clearing, almost casually. Too casually. Naruto narrowed his eyes, cloned. He threw several kunai. The figure exploded into smoke. A log fell to the ground. Substitution technique. The real Kakashi moved silently through the forest. Naruto could feel his presence approaching. Good. Naruto dropped to the ground and began running. Kakashi followed immediately, exactly as Naruto had hoped. Naruto slowed slightly, feigning exhaustion, then suddenly spun and launched several shuriken. Kakashi dodged easily, but the movement triggered the next stage of the trap. Explosive tags detonated nearby. Smoke filled the clearing. Naruto burst forward through the cloud. A powerful kick aimed directly at Kakashi's neck. Kakashi blocked. Naruto twisted midair, spinning away before Kakashi could grab him. Then Naruto formed hand seals. Wind chakra erupted outward. A violent gust blasted dust and leaves into the air. The forest became a swirling storm. Kakashi smirked. A clever attempt at concealment, but unnecessary. He didn't need his eyes to sense Naruto's chakra. The boy charged forward again. Kakashi prepared to counter. Then, 20 kunai flew from the trees behind him. Rai. Perfect timing. Kakashi rolled aside. Naruto attacked again. The coordination between the 3 genin was impressive. But Kakashi was still a jonin. Their strategy alone wouldn't be enough. Or so he thought. Because as Kakashi focused on Naruto and Rai, a subtle shift occurred beneath his feet. Mayu's chakra. And suddenly Kakashi realized something surprising. These 3 had done something most genin never managed. They had actually begun to fight, like a team. Kakashi stared at the bell in Naruto's hand and, for the first time that morning, looked genuinely unsettled, not angry. Not impressed in the easy, casual way a jonin might indulge a talented child. Unsettled. Because what had just happened was not the sort of thing a fresh genin was supposed to do. Naruto had not simply fought well. He had layered deception on top of deception. He had used direct pressure, coordinated timing, terrain, concealment, wind chakra, explosive tags, and then hidden his real body behind the blind spot created by his own teammates' attack. Even Mayu had not known the final step of the plan. That meant Naruto had either improvised at exactly the right instant, or he had prepared for betrayal, failure, and adaptation all at once. And that was when Kakashi truly understood what kind of child stood in front of him. This was not a loud, reckless dreamer charging toward power because he liked the idea of being admired. This was a boy who had grown up with no one to catch him when he fell. A boy who had learned to think 3 steps ahead because the world had never once promised to be kind. A boy who had spent so long alone that he had turned patience into a weapon. For a brief moment, Kakashi almost saw it clearly enough to hurt Minato's instincts, Kushina's fire, and between them, all that loneliness compressed into discipline. Then he buried the thought beneath his usual lazy tone. "Very well," Kakashi said, shaking his head slightly. "But since only Naruto got a bell, the two of you will have to be tied to the rock." The words landed like a blade. Rai's face darkened immediately. Mayu stiffened where she stood, the shock of the near victory still plain across her expression. A few seconds earlier, they had all been moving as one machine. Now the reality of the test came crashing back down on them. There were 2 bells, there were 3 genin. The arithmetic of failure had returned. And this is where lesser teams break, not in the middle of the fight, not when everyone is still moving on adrenaline and momentum. They break afterward, when one person is rewarded, when 2 are punished, when the system quietly encourages everyone to blame each other. Kakashi knew that. In some ways, that was the entire point. He wanted to see whether Naruto would cling to his own success. He wanted to see whether Rai's pride would curdle into resentment. He wanted to see whether Mayu, after coming closest to the bells, would decide that trusting Naruto had been a mistake. In other words, the real test had only just begun. Naruto looked down at the bell in his hand. He had won. By the rules presented to them, he had earned survival. By the logic of every lonely year behind him, he had every reason to hold on to it. No one in Konoha had ever handed him anything freely. He had scraped every inch of progress from stone with his bare hands. If he chose himself now, no one could even call it irrational. It would simply be consistent. But Naruto did not become dangerous because he was selfish. He became dangerous because he observed patterns. And the pattern here was obvious. Kakashi had said from the beginning that the 3 of them were a team. Then he had arranged the test so that one of them would fail. Either the man was a hypocrite, or the bells were never the true objective. Naruto raised his eyes toward Kakashi, and Kakashi, seeing that look, had the uncomfortable sense that the boy had already reached the answer. Rai was the first to speak. "So that's it?" he snapped. "We do everything together, get that close, and because he got there 1 second before us, we fail?" Kakashi shrugged. "Those are the rules." Mayu lowered her head, but not before Naruto caught the expression on her face. It was not just disappointment, it was something more fragile than that. She had trusted the plan, she had trusted him. And trust, for someone like Mayu, did not come cheaply. Naruto understood something then that he had never really been forced to understand inside the archives. Books did not care if you failed them. People did. He closed his hand around the bell. For a second, nobody moved. Then Naruto took a step toward his teammates. Rai's glare shifted to him at once, sharp and wary. Mayu looked up more slowly. Naruto held out the bell. Neither of them took it. "What are you doing?" Rai demanded. Naruto's voice remained level. If the test was only about individual skill, Kakashi-sensei could have measured that in 10 different ways. He made us come hungry. He made us wait together. He told us there were only 2 bells after we had already formed a plan. He wanted to see whether we would turn on each other. Mayu blinked. Rai's expression changed, but only slightly. Naruto went on. "We got closer to the bells by working together than any of us would have gotten alone. That's the only result here that actually matters." The clearing fell silent. Even the leaves seemed to go still. Kakashi did not interrupt. He wanted to hear the rest. Naruto turned the bell once between his fingers, the metal catching the sunlight. "If one of us passes alone," he said, "then the team fails." That landed harder than shouting would have. Because Naruto was not saying it as encouragement, he was saying it as a conclusion, a fact, the sort of thing he had reasoned his way into and found impossible to deny. Rai stared at him, uncertain now. The anger in him had not vanished, but it no longer had a clear target. Mayu, meanwhile, looked as though she had just realized that the person standing beside her was not merely competent or distant or frighteningly calm. He was choosing them. And for Naruto, that choice meant more than either of them yet understood. He had spent years teaching himself not to need anyone. That did not mean he had stopped wanting to belong somewhere. Kakashi's visible eye curved just a little. There it was. The answer, not to the bell test, to the deeper question beneath it. What kind of leader would Naruto become? A selfish prodigy could become strong. A solitary genius could become feared. But someone who could claw his way up alone and still choose the team? That was something else. That was rare. Kakashi let the silence stretch a little longer, partly for effect, partly because he was thinking. He thought of Obito, of all the lessons learned too late, of comrades lost because someone, somewhere, had treated teamwork like a secondary virtue instead of the first law of survival. He also thought, against his will, of Minato again, because this part, strangely enough, was not Minato. This was Naruto's own, a choice born not from being loved well, but from understanding exactly what life looked like without trust. Kakashi exhaled. Then he ruined the tension in the most Kakashi way possible. Well, he said lazily, I suppose that makes things awkward. Rai frowned. What does that mean? It means, Kakashi replied, you pass. For a moment none of them moved. Rai's mouth actually fell open. Mayu stared as though she had misheard. Naruto alone remained outwardly still, though his eyes narrowed the slightest fraction. Kakashi held up his hand. Shinobi who abandon the mission are trash, he said. But shinobi who abandon their comrades are worse than trash. The line landed differently here than it does in the story most people know. Because this time, Naruto was not the loud, impulsive heart of the team learning to care. He was the most capable one, the most composed, the one who had every excuse to stand apart. And yet he had been the first to reject victory without his team. That mattered. It mattered to Kakashi. It mattered to Rai, though he would have rather swallowed nails than admit it. And it mattered most of all to Mayu. Because the truth was, Mayu had feared Naruto before she ever met him properly, feared the rumors, feared the silence around him, feared the way adults flinched when he passed. She had entered Team 7 expecting to endure him, but that expectation cracked in the forest that day, not all at once, not dramatically, just enough for doubt to enter where certainty had once lived. Kakashi cut the ropes loose from the training post and tossed them aside. Starting tomorrow, he said, you're officially my Genin team. Rai let out a breath that was half laugh, half complaint. So all that was just to mess with us? To educate you, Kakashi corrected. With hunger? With realism, with nonsense, Rai muttered. To Naruto's surprise, Kakashi actually seemed amused by that. Mayu stepped away from the post, rubbing her wrists. Her eyes briefly met Naruto's, then dropped again. But this time the motion felt different. Less fear, more uncertainty, as if she were quietly revising everything she thought she knew. Naruto noticed. Of course he noticed. He always noticed. He simply did not know what to do with it. That was the irony of Naruto at this stage of the story. He could read terrain, he could read timing, he could read an opponent's center of gravity and a teacher's hidden intention, but another person reaching toward him, however slightly, that was still a language he barely understood. So instead of speaking, he just handed the bell back to Kakashi. Kakashi took it and gave him a long look, a new look, not the casual glance of a jonin saddled with academy graduates, not the distant watchfulness he had started with on the rooftop. This was assessment sharpened by respect. Kakashi now knew 3 important things. Naruto could think under pressure, Naruto could fight above his age, and Naruto could choose the team over himself even after a life that should have taught him the opposite. That combination was dangerous, in the right way, the kind of dangerous that changed missions, changed teams, changed history. And once Kakashi understood that, he made a quiet decision of his own. He would no longer treat Uzumaki Naruto as merely the son of a legend. He would not underestimate him again. Not as Minato's son, not as the village pariah, not as a child with red hair and too much determination in his eyes. From now on, Kakashi would judge him for what he actually was, a prodigy forged the hard way. The 4 of them left the training ground together as the sun drifted lower across Konoha. It was not a triumphant march. Rai was still grumbling. Mayu was still quiet. Kakashi was still infuriatingly unreadable. But the shape of the team had changed. Before the bell test, there had been 3 genin assigned to the same unit. After it, there was something more fragile and more real. A beginning. That should have settled the matter. Instead, it opened a far more important question. Because now that Team 7 existed, now that Naruto had a sensei who finally understood he was not ordinary, now that Rai and Mayu had seen what he could do, the world beyond the village would soon get its first look as well. And the world outside Konoha would be much less forgiving than a jonin with a pair of bells. The first real mission was coming. And with it, the first time Naruto's strength would have consequences beyond a training field. That is where this story begins to widen. Because once Team 7 leaves the safety of Konoha, the red-haired boy who taught himself in silence will meet something he cannot solve with discipline alone. Danger, blood, and enemies who will notice him immediately. Their first real mission did not look important. That, in the shinobi world, is usually how danger announces itself. Not with thunder, not with prophecy, but with paperwork. A merchant needed an escort to Yukakure. There were roads to travel, valuable goods to protect, and the usual risk of thieves taking interest in a lightly defended caravan. On paper, it was the sort of assignment meant to toughen genin without breaking them. A controlled taste of the world beyond Konoha. A mission where Kakashi could observe them under pressure, and where Team 7 could begin learning what it meant to move, not as students, but as shinobi. And for a while, that was exactly what it seemed to be. The road out of Fire Country widened the world for Naruto in a way books never could. Forests gave way to long trade roads. Villages rose and vanished behind hills. Merchants talked in accents that did not belong to Konoha. The very air felt different the farther they traveled. Naruto absorbed all of it quietly. He watched the rhythm of wagon wheels. He tracked the habits of the drivers. He noted where Kakashi chose to rest, where he did not, and how often the Jonin's lazy body language concealed perfect awareness. Rai talked more than anyone else. That alone would not have been remarkable. Ray always had something to say, but there was a difference now. Before the bell test, his words had been sharp, defensive, almost territorial. On the road, they slowly shifted into something more natural. Complaints became jokes. Jokes became conversation. He still grumbled, still swaggered, still acted like silence was a personal insult. But he no longer spoke around Naruto as if he were some temporary inconvenience. Mayu changed more quietly. Naruto noticed that too. She still startled when addressed too suddenly. She still stayed closer to Rai than anyone else. But once or twice, when Kakashi asked a question, she answered while looking in Naruto's direction instead of away from him. Once, when they stopped near a stream to refill water canisters, she handed him one without having to be asked. It was a tiny gesture, so small that someone else might not have registered it at all. Naruto did. Because Naruto measured trust in half steps. That should have made the mission easier. Instead, it made what came next heavier. The attack did not begin with a shout, it began with timing. A caravan only becomes vulnerable at the moment routine settles into confidence. When the guards have seen too many quiet miles. When the merchants start believing that danger, if it ever existed, has chosen another road. That was when the bandits came. Fast, desperate, not especially skilled by shinobi standards, but dangerous in the way frightened men with blades always are. They hit the caravan in motion, trying to break discipline before anyone could form a proper defense. Horses screamed, drivers panicked, goods were grabbed. One of the wagons lurched hard enough to nearly tip. The road dissolved into noise and dust, and this was where Team 7 stopped being theoretical. Kakashi moved first, of course, effortlessly. One moment he was standing loose and bored, the next, 2 attackers were already down. But he did not erase the battlefield for his students. He let them feel it, let them choose, let them learn how much faster the body has to move when real fear enters the air. Rai took the flank with projectile fire, exactly as expected. Kunai flashed. One bandit dropped screaming with a blade through the shoulder. Mayu used concealment and misdirection to create confusion among the attackers, turning their momentum inward on itself. Men lunged at shadows and found empty air. And Naruto? Naruto became cold, not emotionless, not cruel. Cold in the precise way a mind becomes when it realizes hesitation will cost lives. He moved for the objective before anyone told him to. The stolen scrolls had been taken. 2 bandits had broken away with them. If those documents disappeared into the woods, the mission failed even if the caravan survived. Naruto saw the line of consequence instantly and ran. That choice mattered, because once Naruto left the road, the fight changed from defense to pursuit. The forest beyond the path swallowed sound in fragments, broken branches, breath. Mud kicked loose under sandals. Naruto tracked them by disturbance, by speed, by pattern. One of the bandits was heavier. One had a slight hitch in his stride. They believed they had escaped the main fight. They believed, for a few precious seconds, that they were now only outrunning a child. They were wrong. Naruto caught the first man at the edge of a clearing. No dramatic speech. No warning. No pause for identity or mercy or second thoughts. His blade opened the distance and then the man's throat. The body folded before the stolen momentum had even left it. The second turned in time to understand what had happened. That was the worst part, not the killing itself. The understanding. The way terror rearranged a human face once death became immediate. Naruto killed him too, quickly, efficiently. The same amount of time, the story says, that it might take to finish a meal. And that is exactly why the moment marked him. Because it was easy. Because 2 living men became bodies so quickly that the mind rebelled against the simplicity of it. When Kakashi appeared beside him afterward, carrying the other dead, Naruto did not speak much. The scrolls were recovered. The merchant praised him. The family survived. Mission success. That is how reports flatten these moments. Success, losses acceptable, cargo secure. But Naruto stood there with blood still wet on his face and understood something no academy scroll could teach. Victory and innocence are not the same thing. One of the dying men had tried to say a name. Hiro, a son perhaps, a brother, someone waiting somewhere. Naruto did not know. That uncertainty clung to him harder than the blood did. When Kakashi told him to rest for the remainder of the journey, Naruto obeyed without argument. Sleep hit him like collapse, and even in sleep, the mission followed him. Not as glory, not as triumph, as a body on the roadside and a question with no answer. The road to becoming Hokage was going to be longer than he had imagined. They reached Yugakure by evening. It was almost cruel, the contrast. After blood and dust and the ugly intimacy of killing, the hidden hot water looked peaceful enough to belong in another story. Waterfalls cut silver lines down the valley walls. Hot spring steam drifted through evening light. Shops sold masks and souvenirs to tourists who had no reason to think the world was anything other than manageable. The merchant, grateful and relieved, paid for their stay at a local inn with its own bath. On the surface, the mission had ended well, and that should have been the release. Instead, Yugakure became the place where the world first looked back at Naruto. In the bath, Rai started doing what Rai always did when tension eased, talking nonsense. He speculated about whether Kakashi would ever remove his mask in public. He tried to bait Naruto into taking the idea seriously. Naruto, exhausted and half-drifting in the heated water, actually considered the tactical plausibility of it for a moment, which only encouraged Rai further. It was ridiculous, pointless, and important, because it was the first time Rai treated Naruto not as the mission planner, not as the strange prodigy, not as the village outcast, but as a teammate worth joking with. That kind of shift does not happen in one great speech. It happens in absurd little moments, in shared fatigue, in surviving the same road, and discovering that someone you were prepared to distrust bleeds, kills, and keeps going just like the rest of you. Mayu's thaw came differently, more carefully. She had seen Naruto return with blood on him. She had seen what he could do. That frightened her at first, but fear is unstable when placed too close to sacrifice. Naruto had not killed for pleasure. He had not even looked proud afterward. He had done what the mission required and paid for it in silence. Mayu understood enough of people to know the difference, so the space between them began to narrow, not all at once. Not enough for Naruto to trust it fully, but enough. Enough that Team 7 no longer felt like three names bound by Kakashi's orders. Enough that the next danger would matter more. Because Yugakure held something else waiting beneath its steam and quiet commerce. Not a bandit, not a road ambush, something colder, something ideological, something immortal in all the worst ways. Hidden. Naruto did not yet understand exactly who he had encountered there. Not the scope of it, not the organization behind it. Only that there was a man in this village whose presence felt wrong in a way ordinary criminals never had. The kind of wrongness that does not begin and end with greed. The kind that suggests a wider pattern moving just beyond the edge of what young shinobi are allowed to see. And that is the true turning point of this mission. Not the bandits. Not even the first blood on Naruto's hands. It is the moment the wider world quietly takes notice of him. Because from this point onward, Naruto is no longer only a Konoha problem, or a Konoha secret, or a lonely genius building himself in the archives. He is becoming visible. To his team, to his teacher, and now to enemies who do not belong to the ordinary order of the shinobi world. The mission to Yugakure was supposed to be a lesson. Instead, it became an introduction. And what happens next changes the scale of the story. Because once Naruto brushes against Hiden, once Team 7 returns from that road no longer naive, once the first layer of the world's hidden machinery begins to show itself, there is no going back to simple missions, no going back to childhood, only forward, toward larger tests, toward stranger enemies, toward the first real proof that the red-haired boy Konoha tried to ignore may one day force the entire shinobi world to reckon with him. That night in Yugakure, the air should have felt gentle. Steam rolled up from the springs in pale ribbons. Lantern light trembled across wet wood and stone. Tourists laughed in the streets. Water fell somewhere in the distance in a soft, endless cascade. It was the kind of place that made people believe peace was natural. But shinobi learned quickly that peace is often only what danger looks like from far enough away. Yugakure was beautiful. That did not mean it was safe. In fact, it was precisely the sort of village where something ugly could hide behind a pleasant face and wait for people careless enough to lower their guard. Naruto felt that unease before he could explain it. It came to him the way many important truths did now. Not as a dramatic revelation, as a pressure in the air, a slight wrongness in the pattern. The mission had technically succeeded. The merchant had been delivered. The stolen scrolls had been recovered. Team 7 had done well. And yet Naruto's instincts refused to settle. Part of that was the blood. No matter how much hot spring water steamed around him, he could not quite wash away the memory of how quickly two men had died in the forest. The speed of it still disturbed him, the simplicity of it. It had not felt glorious. It had not even felt triumphant. It had felt necessary, and necessity was colder than he had imagined when he was younger and swore to become Hokage in a dark apartment with no one listening. Rai, naturally, tried to break the mood. He floated on the opposite side of the bath with a wet towel folded over his head and a look of exaggerated seriousness on his face. Then he leaned forward and asked the most important question in the world. Do you think Kakashi-sensei ever takes off his mask in the bath? Naruto actually considered it. Not because the question deserved serious thought, but because Naruto had not yet learned how not to think seriously when presented with a problem. Rai watched him with increasing delight as Naruto's gaze drifted upward, as if somewhere in the rising steam the answer might reveal itself. It would depend, Naruto said at last, on whether he considers the mask part of his standard readiness. Rai burst into laughter so loud that several other bathers looked over. And for one strange, almost weightless moment, the mission loosened its grip on the night. Naruto did not laugh exactly, but something close to ease passed through him. It was a small thing, a ridiculous thing. Yet small things matter on teams. They are often the first proof that fear is no longer the only language people share. Mayu's change was quieter. By the next morning, Naruto noticed the difference in the way she moved around him. She still spoke carefully. She still measured every word, but there was less recoil in her now, less instinctive distance. She'd watched him make decisions under pressure. She had seen him after the fighting, when there was no pride in him and no appetite for praise. She had seen, in other words, that Naruto was not some cold machine the village rumors had built in her mind. He was simply someone carrying too much too early. And because of that, Team 7 left Yugakure not as close friends, not yet, but as something more real than strangers forced together by orders. The mission had done what missions often do. It had stripped away the convenient lies people tell themselves about one another. Rai had learned Naruto could be trusted in a fight. Mayu had learned he would not use power carelessly. Kakashi had learned that the red-haired boy was evolving faster than anyone in Konoha had a right to expect. And Naruto himself had learned the most difficult lesson of all: power did not free you from pain. It simply made the consequences larger. That should have been the end of it. Instead, Yugakure gave them one final warning. It came at night, a wrongness in the dark, a murderous presence. A voice from ahead, arrogant and eager, speaking of heathens and judgment as if murder were a sacrament rather than a crime. Naruto recognized the bloodlust before he recognized the man. It was stronger than what he had felt earlier in the mission. Colder, more ecstatic, less human, and standing with that man was another, heavier and quieter, whose patience felt somehow even more dangerous. Haiden and Kakuzu. Naruto did not yet know what those names would one day mean. He only knew that whatever stood in front of Team 7 now was beyond ordinary bandits and beyond the simple hazards of escort duty. Rai tried words first. That in itself said a great deal about the pressure in the air. He played for time, smooth and fast, pretending they had been sent to rendezvous there, hoping confusion might open a gap. It was a good instinct. It even worked for half a heartbeat, but Naruto had already seen what mattered. Their enemies were deciding whether to kill them. That meant the only useful opening was the one they made themselves. So in the instant Haiden hesitated, Naruto formed the clone seal. Shadow clones exploded into existence around him, steel ready in their hands. No panic, no wasted motion, just action, immediate disruption, exactly where the enemy had expected hesitation. It was the same trait Kakashi had recognized during the bell test, now sharpened by real danger. Naruto did not need permission to become decisive. He already was. That clash did not resolve the larger threat. It was not meant to. Moments like this exist in stories for a different reason. They tell you the scale has changed. Yugakure had begun as a road mission. Now it had become contact with forces tied to something darker moving through the world. Something organized. Something patient. Naruto could not see the full outline yet, but he could feel it. There were people beyond village borders whose violence was not random, whose goals were not local, whose presence bent the shape of every encounter around them. And that realization mattered almost as much as the fight itself. Because from this point onward, Naruto's life could no longer be defined only by Konoha's hatred, or the Archive Library's quiet protection, or the old vow he made to become Hokage. Those things still mattered. They always would. But now another truth entered the story. The world was bigger than his pain, and also far more dangerous. When Team 7 returned home, the village would still be the village. The same suspicious looks, the same cold silences, the same people unable to see the boy clearly even when he saved lives in front of them. But Naruto himself was no longer standing where he had been before. Something in him had shifted. He had led under pressure. He had killed. He had protected. He had seen the first outline of enemies who belonged to a wider and darker game. And perhaps most important of all, he had begun to understand that being Hokage would never simply mean being acknowledged. It would mean carrying burdens other people could not see. That realization deepened him. It did not soften him. Naruto did not return from Yugakure brighter or kinder or suddenly healed by companionship. That would be too easy. What he gained was harder and, in some ways, more valuable. He gained proof. Proof that his discipline meant something outside the library. Proof that Kakashi's respect was earned. Proof that Rai and Mayu could become true comrades. Proof that his life was already intersecting with forces far larger than a child's loneliness. The setting sun of this story is a strange symbol. At first glance, it sounds like an ending, a dimming, a fading of light. But that is not what it means here. Because a setting sun does not vanish. It changes the sky. It stains everything in its path with color and warning and memory. It tells you the day you knew is ending, yes, but it also tells you night is coming, and that whatever survives the dark will emerge into a different morning. That is Naruto in this timeline. Not the loud fool everyone underestimated. Not the lovable disaster canon was willing to forgive. This Naruto is quieter, sharper, more alone. He is the child the village rejected, who responded not by collapsing, but by studying until the world itself became legible. He is the boy who turned books into teachers and isolation into strategy. He is the genin who thinks before he speaks, who acts before others finish doubting him, and who can stand in blood and still choose the team over himself. And that is why this one change matters so much. Give Naruto Kushina's red hair. Give him Minato's mind. Strip away the easy warmth that might have softened his early years. Then force him to build himself in silence. What emerges is not simply a stronger Naruto. It is a more dangerous one. A Naruto who may not just survive history, but rewrite it. And that is what makes alternate timelines so compelling. One difference, one altered childhood. One shift in how a village treats a single orphaned boy. From that, everything else begins to bend. Alliances, battles, loyalty, identity, even the meaning of leadership itself. Because if this version of Naruto keeps walking the path now opening in front of him, then the shinobi world is not waiting for a hero in orange to crash into history, shouting his dream to everyone who will listen. It is waiting for something quieter, something harder, a red-haired storm no one noticed soon enough. And that is where we leave this part of the tale, not at the end of his rise, not even close. Only at the moment the world begins to understand that Uzumaki Naruto is no longer a child. Konoha can afford to misunderstand. He is becoming a force. And once forces like that begin to move, history has no choice but to move with them. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a like, subscribe to Fanfics in a Nutshell, and stay with me for the next turn in this timeline, because in stories like these, the most important change is never the first one. It is the one that comes after the world notices.